Have you ever witnessed a once rejected teacher defend her new life in the rugged frontier, only to find an unexpected ally in a fellow scarred soul? From train station heartbreak to a makeshift schoolhouse filled with determined pupils, Faye Morrison embarks on a journey of defiance and courage. All the while, Rowan Fairburn, a stoic blacksmith bearing his own burn marks, stands at her side. In a small Colorado town where appearances seem to matter, they prove that resilience shines brighter than any scar. How does a woman dismissed for her looks become the town's most essential educator? And can a man shaped by fire forge a lasting love amid whispers of a looming railroad in local politics? Stick around and discover how Faye's arrival sparks a community's transformation, culminating in a union of hearts that no prejudice can tear apart. And if this tale moves your spirit, subscribe and follow our channel for more stirring stories that blend hope, hardship, and the healing power of acceptance. Faye Morrison stepped off the train at Juniper Falls Station with a single battered trunk and a heart full of cautious hope. She watched, dazed, as the locomotive hissed away, carrying behind it every last vestige of the old life she had left behind in Baltimore. For nearly a year, she had exchanged letters with Everett Harper, a rancher who wrote of open skies and second chances. He had proposed marriage in his steady, measured handwriting, never once demanding a photograph or hinting that her appearance mattered. Faye, desperate to start anew after losing her teaching position, had accepted. Yet the moment Everett spotted the puckered scars on her cheek and jaw, scars left by the flames that claimed her childhood home, his expression turned cold. "This isn't what I agreed to," he'd murmured, stepping back as if the very sight of her seared him. Faye had tried to explain that the injuries did not impair her intelligence, her ability to cook, to keep a home, or even to be a loving companion. But to Everett, her face was a disqualifier he could not abide. Before she could beg him to reconsider, he placed a few coins in her hand for a return ticket, muttered a stiff apology, and strode off across the platform without a backward glance. Alone on the station planks, autumn wind biting her skin, Faye stared blankly at the departing train and tried to quell the rising panic in her chest. She was nearly 37, scarred, unemployed, and thousands of miles from the place she used to call home. Her savings, $18 plus Everett's half-hearted sum, would not stretch far, especially not if she had to wait for an eastbound train that only passed through once a week. Glancing around, Faye took in Juniper Falls, Colorado, a scattering of modest buildings, dusty Main Street, a small hotel, and the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's forge somewhere off to the left. There was no one to meet her with a smile or a carriage, no safe harbor to welcome a displaced schoolteacher. Shouldering her trunk, Faye forced herself to walk into town. She was used to pitying stares from strangers, used to the hush of conversation when people noticed her scars. In Baltimore, she had learned to keep her head high, ignoring others' discomfort. Here, though, she felt more conspicuous than ever, her future resting on precarious ground. The small wooden hotel with its chipping paint and hanging sign offered some hope of lodging, at least until the next train. But as Faye approached, the door slammed open and Everett Harper stormed out, nearly colliding with her. A flash of recognition passed across his face before he quickly looked away. "I assumed you'd leave," he muttered, voice thick with embarrassment. "If you need a place, talk to Tom Davis at the livery. The hotel is full for the upcoming Harvest Festival." When she tried to object, he shoved a sealed envelope into her hand. "That covers your fare back east. I've done all I can." Faye could scarcely speak through the knot in her throat. Gripping her trunk's handle again, she watched as Everett walked away without a hint of regret. Resentment coiled in her stomach, but she swallowed it down. First, she would secure a roof. Then she would search for a job if any existed. If all else failed, she had no choice but to board that Wednesday train and return to the city that no longer wanted her. Following Everett's terse advice, Faye trudged toward Davis Livery at the edge of town. The stable's wide doors were propped open, letting in the late afternoon light. Horses stamped and whickered within, and she caught the faint smell of manure and saddle leather. Beside the main stable building, a smaller structure spewed a steady clang of metal upon metal. A blacksmith's forge, if her ears didn't lie. Setting her trunk at the stable's threshold, she peered inside. An older man with a graying beard, all angles and elbows, was grooming a dark mare. He raised an eyebrow at her approach. "Are you Tom?" she asked, voice cracking slightly from thirst and strain. He shook his head. Tom's my younger brother. Name's Walter Davis. If you're looking for a stable, you found it. If you're looking for a room, that's Tom's business, and he's out. His gaze landed on the right side of her face, and for a split second she braced for revulsion or pity. Instead, he merely glanced away, unimpressed by superficialities. He'll be back after supper, so you can wait. Thank you, she managed, relieved by his matter-of-fact tone. Just then a deep voice called from behind. I can help with that. A massive figure stepped forward, shadow falling across her trunk. He stood a head taller than Walter, with broad shoulders and heavily muscled arms. His leather apron and soot-streaked hands marked him as the blacksmith. But it was his face that drew her attention. The entire right side bore deep burn scars, some thicker than her own. Before Faye could protest, he hefted her trunk easily, gesturing toward a small office in the corner of the livery. Let's set it down there, you can rest. She noticed the older man, Walter, watching with a hint of approval. Thanks. She paused, expecting him to supply a name. The blacksmith set the trunk inside the cramped office and straightened. Rowan Fairburn, he offered, voice low but resonant. Briefly, his gaze flicked to her own scars, then flicked back up with no sign of disdain, just a flicker of recognition. Despite exhaustion and weariness, Faye felt a wave of gratitude. Faye Morrison, I appreciate this. Rowan shrugged. The stable's no place for a lady to stand, arms full of luggage. Tom's a fair man. He'll rent you a room above the workshop. Walter grunted. You can wait in the office. There's coffee on the stove. Just keep out of my books. Then he wandered off, leading the horse outside. Inside, the office felt unexpectedly cozy. A pot-bellied stove in one corner, a desk cluttered with ledgers. Rowan hovered uncertainly, as if wanting to say more. Ultimately, he just offered a polite nod and turned back toward his forge. I have nails to finish. If you get hungry, Lucille Green runs a cafe on Main. Simple. Cheap. Faye sank into a rickety chair, exhaustion claiming her. She had anticipated heartbreak, but not quite this swift, brutal dismissal from Everett. Instead, she encountered a surprising kindness from strangers. Walter's brusque acceptance, Rowan's unflinching gaze, these were small mercies that steadied her rattled soul. For now, she would rest, gather her thoughts, and then look for a place to eat. Time enough to fret over her uncertain future once she had some warmth in her belly. In this tiny act of self-care, she glimpsed a faint possibility of hope. Nightfall deepened over Juniper Falls, lamps beginning to glow across the meager skyline of the frontier settlement. Faye emerged from the stable office, trunk safely stowed, and walked up the main street in search of Lucille Green's cafe. She found it easily enough, a modest building painted blue, with a simple sign reading, Green's Home Cooking. She paused outside, nerves fluttering, then pushed the door open. A gentle warmth enfolded her along with the scent of simmering stew, fresh bread, and roasted vegetables. The place was bustling, nearly every table occupied by patrons chatting over mugs of coffee or plates of hearty fare. Conversations dipped for a moment as strangers glanced her way, eyes flicking briefly to her scarred cheek, then resumed with a few polite nods and greeting. A sturdy woman in her 40s, her auburn hair pinned in a tidy bun, caught Faye's eye from behind a long counter. Come on in, dear, the woman called, beckoning her to a small corner table. Find yourself a seat, and I'll be right with you. Her tone was brisk, yet not unkind. As Faye settled, she noticed the woman's name embroidered on her apron, L. Green. When Lucille Green approached, Faye attempted a smile. Rowan Fairburn mentioned your cooking, said it's the best in town. Lucille chuckled, placing a menu before her. He's a quiet man, but his compliments mean something. What can I get you? Starving after her long day, Faye ordered beef stew, bread, and a cup of tea. While Lucille vanished to the kitchen, Faye glanced around. A group of miners in dusty coveralls huddled at one table, a cluster of ranch hands at another, and a pair of women in bonnets whispering near the window. She caught a murmur or two about that new woman, but no overt hostility. Compared to the searing rejection Everett had offered, these mild stares felt almost welcoming. Lucille returned with a steaming bowl. The first spoonful made Faye close her eyes in relief. Tender beef, rich gravy, carrots, and potatoes infused with warmth. She realized how hollow her stomach felt, how heavy her limbs were. The day's events had drained her. Here, in the soft glow of lantern light, she could simply exist for a moment, savoring the meal that renewed her strength. A moment later, the cafe door opened with a jingle, and in walked Everett Harper. Faye stiffened instinctively, her appetite souring. He spotted her immediately, pausing mid-stride. She anticipated a scowl or a smug smile, but Everett's expression remained guarded. Flanking him was a distinguished older man with a neat white mustache, likely Judge Mattingly if Faye recalled the name she'd heard from a passing conversation. The two men took a table, conversing in low voices. From the corner of her eye, Faye saw Everett occasionally glance in her direction. Murmuring a thanks to Lucille, she focused on her stew, determined not to let the presence of her erstwhile fiancé overshadow her meal. Once she caught a snippet of their talk. Survey results in by next week. The route will pass near the blacksmith's property. The conversation quickly dropped to a hush, so the local rumor about the railroad's expansion might be more than rumor. She remembered hearing talk of new rails being laid to connect eastern lines with remote mountain towns, opening trade and shifting entire economies. As Faye finished, Lucille came by with a gentle question in her eyes. "You all right, dear? You look pale." Faye managed a half smile. "Just a long day. Thank you for the wonderful meal." She counted out coins from Everett's envelope, trying to ignore the sting of needing that money. "Nonsense," Lucille insisted. "You keep your coins. This one's on me." At Faye's attempt to protest, she added, "You look like you'll be around a bit, so we can arrange some help in the kitchen if you're short on funds. Been thinking about hiring a part-timer for a while." Touched by the offer, Faye nodded, voice catching in her throat. "Thank you, truly." Stepping outside, she inhaled the crisp air laced with pine. Overhead, the sky shimmered with unfamiliar stars, bright without city lights to dim them. She made her way back to the stable where Tom Davis, a stocky man in his 50s, was finally waiting by the lantern-lit entrance. He introduced himself warmly, promising her one of the small rooms above the workshop for 3 nights at a reduced rate. Faye's relief was immense. She had a roof, she had the beginnings of a plan, and maybe some glimmer of possibility. By dawn the next day, Faye woke in a narrow bed above the workshop, the morning light painting golden bars across the wooden floor. The night's rest had soothed her frayed nerves a bit. She remembered Rowan Fairbairn's calm presence in the stable and Lucille Green's kind gesture at the cafe, small anchors in this unfamiliar town. She recalled the talk of railroad expansion, a conflict that touched Juniper Falls more deeply than she'd first realized. Tugging on her second-best dress, a navy cotton frock, she ventured outside, intent on exploring. The stable yard was already alive with activity. Horses whinnied, and Walter Davis cursed a broken harness. Across the yard, Rowan emerged from the forge, already black-smudged despite the early hour. He caught sight of Faye, nodded a greeting. She almost waved back, but hesitated, uncertain of boundaries. Gathering her nerve, she walked into town. Juniper Falls by daylight glowed with a rough-hewn charm. False-fronted buildings lined the wide dirt road. The Penrose Mercantile, a bank, a small apothecary, the cafe, a barber, a doctor's office, and a modest church with a short steeple. She had no illusions of becoming a rancher's wife now, but maybe she could find some sort of temporary position here. Her teaching experience might serve in some capacity, though she doubted a formal school needed an out-of-work teacher in such a small settlement. When she reached the Penrose Mercantile, a sign reading "Owned by T. Penrose and Wife," she stepped inside. A mild chaos reigned, with customers jostling for supplies. A stout man behind the counter tried to answer multiple questions at once. Catching Faye's eye, he managed a grin. "Welcome, miss. Can I help you find something?" Unsure how to inquire about jobs, she merely said, "I'm new in town. I wondered if you need extra help." He wiped sweat from his brow, scanning the store. "Not sure. My wife handles the hiring. She's out delivering an order. Come back this afternoon?" Faye nodded, thanking him politely. Outside again, she noticed the low-slung building labeled school. Its windows were dark, the yard empty. Did Juniper Falls have a school teacher, or had they foregone formal education? The question prickled in her mind. Teaching was what she did best, after all. Scars be damned. Continuing down the street, she glimpsed Everett Harper stepping out of the bank, adjusting his hat with proprietary ease. She ducked behind a wagon, not wanting another confrontation, her heart thumping in annoyance at how quickly shame tried to resurface. She kept walking, ignoring the faint knot in her chest. Instead, she found herself drifting toward the forge, perhaps seeing Rowan Fairburn, the only other person in this town who shared the burden of burn scars, would provide some grounding. The ringing clangs of metal greeted her as she neared. Inside, Rowan pounded a glowing horseshoe on an anvil. His broad back flexed with each strike, the old burn tissue apparent over his right shoulder. Not wanting to intrude, Faye hovered at the wide doorway. He glanced up, halting mid-swing, surprise crossing his face briefly. "Morning," she managed, self-conscious. "Walter said you'd know if the stable needs more help. I can handle some tasks." Rowan set the horseshoe aside, wiping his forehead with a rag. "Stable might, but that's mostly Walter's call. We might talk to Tom. He's more open to new hires than my brother." His gaze flicked over her worn dress and the anxious set of her shoulders. "Though your skill set, from what I gather, is more academic." Faye bit her lip. "I taught at a ladies' academy for years, but the position ended. I might do simpler work until another teaching job appears." Something like sympathy flickered across Rowan's scarred features. "A teacher, Town's had trouble keeping one. The last teacher left months ago. Might be an opening soon. Mayor Rogers was complaining about it." Faye's pulse quickened. "If so, do you know where I might inquire?" Rowan gestured with his hammer. "Council meets in the town hall every Thursday. That's tomorrow. You can ask then. Let them see your credentials." She felt a spark of hope. "Thank you. It's more than I dared hope. This place might become more than a brief stop." Rowan studied her, a faint, understanding half-smile lifting the unscarred side of his mouth. "Sometimes the place you arrive in by accident turns out to be home." Then, returning to business, he lifted the horseshoe again. "If you need anything, I'm around." "Thank you," she repeated, touched by his sincerity. As she left the forge behind, a curious warmth accompanied her, an anchor of sorts. If ever she'd believed her scars would forever isolate her, Rowan offered a living contradiction. He bore marks just as severe, yet found acceptance and purpose here. Maybe she too could find that acceptance among these mountains and these people who seem to look past surface imperfections. At midday, Faye decided to follow Lucille's earlier suggestion and help in the cafe in exchange for a modest wage, or at least some meals. She arrived to find Lucille training a young teen behind the counter, showing him how to measure coffee portions. The smell of fresh biscuits wafted from the kitchen. The place was lively again, customers drifting in to escape the mountain show. "Perfect timing," Lucille exclaimed, handing Faye an apron. "Wash up and start with clearing tables, will you? The lunch crowd's coming in fast." Though menial, the work felt honest, and Faye discovered a gentle satisfaction in delivering steaming plates of stew or fish, hearing the hum of grateful diners. Occasionally, she noticed Everett lurking in the street beyond, accompanied by Judge Mattingly or other influential figures. Talk was ongoing about the Northern Pacific Line cutting through farmland and potentially displacing a few established businesses, including Rowan's Forge. The tension in the town was palpable. After the rush subsided, Lucille found Faye in the kitchen, wiping her brow. "You have a knack for this, dear," she said, handing Faye a glass of cold water. "Customers like your polite efficiency, and you don't get ruffled easily." Faye smiled wryly. "Once you've faced scornful stares in a city classroom, balancing plates of stew is easy." The comment drew a concerned look from Lucille, but she let it pass. Instead, she switched topics with a conspiratorial gleam. "You planning to attend the Harvest Festival this weekend? Biggest social event all year. Might be just the thing to meet folks, maybe even our blacksmith again." She raised her eyebrows meaningfully. Faye felt color rise to her cheeks. "I doubt Rowan's the sort to attend frivolous dances," she managed. Though deep down, the thought of a festival, of seeing him outside the forge's dim glow, made her heart flutter. Lucille only smirked. "Wait and see, our blacksmith might surprise you." Later that afternoon, Faye took a break, stepping onto the back porch of the cafe to breathe in the crisp mountain air. She had half a mind to bring up the school situation at tomorrow's council meeting, but nerves unsettled her. Her scars had cost her a city teaching job. Who was to say a small frontier council would be any more welcoming? As if conjured by her worries, Rowan's deep voice spoke from below. Ms. Morrison? He stood by a stack of crates, apparently delivering fresh nails to Lucille. She looked down over the porch railing. Hello again? She said, letting a small smile slip onto her face. You managed to talk to Tom about stable work or anything else? He asked. She shook her head. I'm helping Lucille for now, but I do plan to speak to the council about the teacher vacancy. Her tone betrayed her anxious eagerness. Something like approval warmed his gaze. Good, this town needs a proper teacher. Been lacking for too long. He paused, adding more quietly, let me know if you need references or if you want me to stand with you at the meeting. It was a generous offer. Faye suspected Rowan's word carried weight, given how townspeople spoke of him with respect. Thank you, she managed, her heart swelling with gratitude. But I think I should do it alone. Stand on my own merits, if that makes sense. He nodded. Understood. There was no wounded pride, just an acceptance. I'll be at the meeting anyway. I handle council notes sometimes. If they question your credibility, I can attest to your capabilities. Before she could respond, Lucille bustled out with a reminder about chores. Rowan offered a final nod and went on his way. Faye stood there a moment longer, the memory of his unwavering gaze etched in her mind, the sense that someone here truly believed in her worth. Perhaps tomorrow's meeting would be the turning point she needed. Council day arrived, and Faye entered the Juniper Falls Town Hall with her shoulders squared. She clutched a small leather folder containing letters of recommendation from her former headmistress, a copy of her teaching certificate, and a heartfelt letter from parents of one of her old academy students. She'd pinned back her hair neatly, wearing her best gray dress, high-collared to keep the focus on her credentials rather than the scars crossing her cheek. Mayor Crosby, a wiry man who looked nervous beneath a drooping mustache, presided at the main table. Seated beside him were Judge Mattingly, two council members she recognized as farmers named Carlson and Bateman, and a final seat for a man introduced as Councilman Riley. Everett Harper lounged in the front row, flipping through some official-looking documents. She noticed Rowan Fairburn off to the side, scribbling notes at a small desk. He shot her a discreet, reassuring nod. First on the agenda came the railroad question. Judge Mattingly unrolled a large map, extolling the virtues of connecting Juniper Falls to Denver. Councilman Carlson pointed out concerns about farmland displacement, while Riley insisted compensation would be fair. Faye observed quietly, learning how each personality influenced the debate. The mayor appeared torn, eyes darting from face to face, anxious to appease everyone. At last, the council moved to general community matters. Mayor Crosby frowned at the agenda. We remain without a teacher since Mrs. Howell's departure. We need a solution before spring's term. His eyes skimmed the small crowd. Anyone care to speak on that? Clearing her throat, Faye stepped forward. Mayor, I'd like to be considered. She offered her folder. I taught at Ravenswood Ladies Seminary in Baltimore for over a decade, specializing in literature, arithmetic, and history. I have references here. Carlson brightened. We need a teacher, that's certain. Let's see what you have. He took the folder from her, flipping through it. Councilman Bateman also leaned in, adjusting his spectacles, but Judge Mattingly's gaze lingered on her face. Miss Morrison, is it? There's more to teaching than books. Some townsfolk might have concerns about your appearance with the children. His words were clipped, but they stung nonetheless. She felt color draining from her cheeks, but she forced composure. I assure you, sir, she said, voice steady, my capabilities aren't diminished by scars. My old students overcame any initial surprise quickly, focusing on the lessons I provided. Children are remarkably adaptable, as long as the teacher is confident. Before the judge could object further, Councilman Carlson chimed in. We lost a fine teacher after a few months because she found the conditions too rough. If Miss Morrison can handle a city academy, she can handle our simpler ways, scarring or not. Mayor Crosby coughed into his hand. All right, we'll vote on whether to hire Miss Morrison. We can do a provisional period, say 3 months, to see how it goes. He eyed Everett Harper, who had stiffened. Any concerns from the public? Everett stood, affecting a mild expression. I'm not opposed to new educators, but we must ensure no personal controversies overshadow the children's welfare. He didn't meet her eyes, but the implication was clear. He wanted to remind everyone how she came under false pretenses as a prospective bride. Rowan's voice cut through the hush. You talk about controversies, Mr. Harper, but let's keep facts straight. Miss Morrison came openly to Juniper Falls believing she had a place. The only scandal is your reaction upon meeting her. A ripple of surprise coursed through the room. Rowan rarely spoke at these meetings. Everyone knew him as the silent record keeper. Everett's face tightened, but he stayed silent, perhaps not wanting to reveal their private arrangement. Mayor Crosby seized the moment. Let's put it to a vote. All in favor of giving Miss Morrison a 3-month trial as school teacher, raise hands. Carlson and Bateman's hands shot up promptly. After a beat of hesitation, Riley joined them. The mayor added his as well, making 4. Only Mattingly declined, lips pursed, but the majority won. Stunned, Fay managed, "Thank you. I promise to serve Juniper Falls to the best of my ability." Applause trickled around the room, followed by supportive murmurs. Even townspeople who'd never laid eyes on her until this moment offered nods of encouragement. She turned to Rowan, who quietly gave a nod of approval. Despite the nerves knotting her stomach, a beam of gratitude spread across her face. She had secured a teaching position beyond her wildest hope, and that sense of belonging blossomed within. Everett, however, glowered from his seat, slipping out as soon as the matter ended. Judge Mattingly looked troubled, but equally reluctant to spark further conflict. The meeting proceeded to minor issues overshadowed by the tension. By the time the council adjourned, Fay's hands trembled slightly from adrenaline, but folks surrounded her with warm congratulations. She clutched her folder, heart fluttering with a new sense of purpose. She now possessed not only a job, but a community that, for the most part, welcomed her in. The following weeks swept by in a whirlwind of lesson planning and learning each child's name, strengths, and struggles. The schoolhouse, once quiet and underused, now buzzed with the sound of recitations, geography drills, and hesitant attempts at reading poetry. Fay introduced them to structured sessions, discipline tempered with warmth, and a daily challenge. One question that required creative thinking, not just rote memorization. Initially, some older students bristled, but soon curiosity took over. As the final leaves fell from the aspens and winter's breath touched the crisp morning air, Fay noticed a change in the townspeople's attitudes. Parents who had eyed her scars warily began praising the strides their children made in reading or arithmetic. Even those reluctant to speak with her in the beginning, like old Mr. Foster, father of 2 rowdy boys, now tipped their hats respectfully, thanking her for teaching discipline and manners. With each small success, Fay felt the grip of past insecurities ease, replaced by the confidence she once possessed before the fire. At the same time, Rowan Fairburn became a steady presence in her life. He popped into the schoolhouse with small gifts of nails or hinges to repair desks, or arrived quietly to fix a wobbly window frame. She discovered, through overheard comments, that he refused any request for payment. When she confronted him about it one afternoon, eyes flashing with indignation, he merely shrugged. "School's important," he said. "Your efforts matter more than a few hours of my work." She tried, in vain, to slip a few coins into his coat pocket, but he returned them stoically. Sometimes, after the children left, they'd chat about the future of the town. He told her how the railroad's realignment might still threaten his forge if Judge Mattingly and Everett Harper swung the vote with a newly proposed route that pinned Rowan's property as an ideal site for a depot. Fay's chest tightened at the idea of him uprooted from his place of business. Yet Rowan, with typical calm, simply said, "I'll manage," though a shadow flickered across his expression. Meanwhile, Everett lurked on the periphery. He had lost face when the council hired Fay, and bits of rumors suggested he was courting certain council members to push for a more urban-minded teacher. But each day, Fay's rapport with the children strengthened. She recognized that might be her best defense, prove her competence so well that no political maneuver could justify letting her go. Everett's attempts to tarnish her name fizzled as parents like the Hendersons and Ms. Danvers openly praised her methods. Even Judge Mattingly's stiff disapproval softened a notch after hearing how she'd handled Emma, his grandniece it turned out, who started showing remarkable progress in arithmetic. One morning, Fay came early to the schoolhouse to prep a science lesson, only to find a brand new set of chalk and slate boards waiting on the teacher's desk. No note or explanation, just a practical gift. She thought immediately of Rowan and his quiet generosity. Sure enough, she glimpsed him later that day, discreetly watching children practice penmanship through the open window. He offered no mention of the boards, but there was a faint smile tugging at his lips. She whispered her thanks in passing, but his only response was a gentle tilt of his head, as if to say, all in a day's kindness. With each such interaction, Faye's heart found deeper roots in Juniper Falls. Here among everyday warmth, small acts of care, and the unspoken tenderness between her and a scarred blacksmith. Winter arrived in earnest, draping Juniper Falls in a shimmering layer of white. Flickers of excitement raced through the town as folks prepared for the year's final celebration. The Frostlight Festival, a day of music, feasting, and dancing. For Faye, it would be her second big town event since she arrived. The memory of the Harvest Festival still glowed warmly in her mind, how Rowan had quietly asked if she'd dance, how they'd stepped onto the makeshift dance floor. She recalled the hush that fell when they were seen together. But now, with the new festival looming, her heart fluttered again. Would Rowan ask her a second time? Amid the swirling snow, school duties continued. Faye supervised the children's reading by lamplight as days grew shorter. She introduced them to a series of winter-themed poems, encouraging them to write their own lines about the snow-laden pines and frozen creek. Their enthusiasm soared when Rowan brought a small, newly forged stove hook for the classroom stove, making it safer for the children to help feed the fire. Each time he visited, the older girls would giggle or hush each other, sneaking glances at the handsome blacksmith. Faye tried to appear unruffled, but secretly her cheeks warmed at their knowing smiles. Occasionally, rumors filtered in from the council. Everett Harper lobbied heavily to finalize a railway station on Rowan's land, claiming it was the most strategic location for future growth. Council meetings turned tense. Carlson and Bateman resisted, while Riley seemed uncertain. Judge Mattingly, who owned stakes in the railroad, sided with Everett. The mayor, caught in the crossfire, delayed further votes. Meanwhile, Rowan carried on with quiet fortitude, forging horseshoes, wagon rims, and the occasional decorative piece. He told Faye once that, if the station location forced him out, he'd adapt. I've lost a forge before, he said. I lost a life before. I can rebuild. But Faye sensed his unspoken heartbreak at the idea of uprooting. She began gently advocating among parents, emphasizing that a stable blacksmith at the heart of town benefited everyone, from repairs to the broader sense of community. We can't let a valuable resource be run off, Ms. Danvers declared, rallying supporters. Even the Hendersons joined the cause, pointing out that dividing the commercial district risked fracturing the town. If enough local opposed Everett's plan, it might not pass. In the midst of these swirling politics, Lucille approached Faye after class one day with a conspiratorial grin. Frostlight Festival is next weekend, and we're all expecting to see you and Rowan there. At Faye's protesting glance, she added, it's not just about dancing. It's about the official candle ceremony, the fireworks, a chance to celebrate how far we've come this year. Faye blushed. I'm sure I'll attend, but I can't speak for Rowan. Despite her disclaimers, she felt a thrill of anticipation. Another festival would be another moment to appear publicly with Rowan, possibly as more than just acquaintances. Since the harvest dance, their quiet companionship had blossomed into deeper affection. Late-night talks about dreams, sorrowful confessions of the day each fire took from them more than skin. Yet they remained cautious. Painful betrayals from the past still echoed in both hearts. When Lucille teased that Faye might need a new gown for the Frostlight celebration, Faye laughed. You're in league with Ms. Penrose, aren't you? She's already measuring me for something warm but stylish. Lucille merely winked. In this town, we all conspire for love and happiness, where we can. Faye's smile lingered. She recalled the first time she stepped onto the train platform, feeling completely alone. Now she saw a tapestry of connections gently weaving around her. The scars on her cheek had not vanished, but their weight felt less. Through forging new bonds, Faye found that acceptance could be stronger than any burn. Frostlight Festival dawned under a crisp, cloudless sky, the sun gleaming off thick snow. The entire main street of Juniper Falls bustled with people hanging evergreen wreaths in paper lanterns. Children raced around, cheeks pink from cold, while booths offering spiced cider and roasted chestnuts popped up near the town hall. Faye, dressed in a woolen cloak over her newly tailored gown, a soft burgundy color Ms. Penrose assured complemented her features, shivered with excitement. At midday, the festival began in earnest with music from a traveling fiddler trio. Faye wandered the stalls, exclaiming over the handcrafted ornaments and crocheted scarves. Her scars drew far fewer stares now. She had, over 3 months, become integrated enough that her presence was normal. Many folks greeted her as Miss Morrison, or simply teacher, politely asking about upcoming lessons or praising their child's progress. Eventually, she spotted Rowan's broad shoulders in the crowd, back turned as he helped a local farmer hoist a new sign near a display. She approached, heart jumping a little. He wore a well-fitted dark jacket, a subtle pattern on the vest beneath. When he turned, the plain delight that lit his face upon seeing her made her breath catch. "Faye," he said, voice warm amid the chilly air. A soft hush seemed to envelop them, though the bustle continued around them. They joined forces, walking arm in arm through the displays. Lucille cornered them at her hot cider booth, pressing steaming cups into their hands. "Don't vanish when the band starts," she urged. "We expect you two front and center for the dance." Rowan shot Faye a questioning glance, and she smiled shyly, remembering their previous swirl across the dance floor. Throughout the afternoon, Faye noticed Everett Harper hovering in the background, speaking in hushed tones with Judge Mattingly. She wondered if they plotted some last-ditch attempt to relocate the forge. She tried not to let it dampen her spirits, especially since half the town seemed to gather around Rowan and her, offering well wishes or asking about the next term at school. One father bragged that his once illiterate son now read entire paragraphs from Mark Twain, thanks to her gentle guidance. Another woman teased Rowan about finally stepping out in company, her gaze drifting meaningfully to Faye. As the sun sank behind the snowy peaks, flickering lanterns set the street aglow. A hush spread as the fiddler trio took center stage, launching into a lively reel. People found partners and began dancing on the makeshift wooden floor. Without hesitation, Rowan offered Faye his arm. This time, there was no trace of nerves or uncertainty, only a shared understanding that they belonged side by side. The music soared, and they spun among the dancers, Faye's burgundy skirt swirling around her boots, Rowan's firm hand guiding each step. Where once they might have shrunk under disapproving stares, they now glided with easy grace, forging their own path as the community looked on with general acceptance, even affection. Halfway through the reel, the music softened for a slower tune. Panting slightly from the quick dance, Faye found herself pressed near Rowan's chest, his heartbeat firm under her gloved hands. Moonlight dappled them from above, blending with lantern glow. "You make it feel easy," she murmured, referring not just to dancing. Rowan brushed a thumb across her unscarred cheek, voice thick with warmth. "With you, it is." Faye's heart fluttered at the naked sincerity of his words. She saw no revulsion in his gaze, only gentle pride and something deeper. A promise of unity between two scarred souls who recognized each other's worth. As the final strains of music died away, the crowd cheered and applauded. Faye felt Rowan's presence at her side like a quiet anchor. All around them, neighbors conversed about the wonders of the next year, how the town might continue to grow, the possibility of a more balanced railroad deal. Some still grumbled that Judge Mattingly and Everett Harper might push for an unbalanced outcome. But with each passing day, the tide of public opinion seemed to turn in favor of local resilience and fairness. Faye silently prayed that Rowan's forge would remain untouched, that he wouldn't be forced to relocate from the home he had built. After the dance, folks drifted to a large bonfire near the outskirts of town, a frostlight custom meant to symbolize warmth in the deepest winter. Rowan and Faye joined them, the sparks flying skyward like orange fireflies. Standing close, they listened as Miss Penrose read a short passage about hope, how the darkest months could still harbor new beginnings. At the edges of the dancing light, Faye glimpsed Everett, face drawn tight. But he said nothing, overshadowed by the general festivity, his influence on this night limited. When the bonfire conversation turned general, Rowan guided Faye away from the crowd, walking a short path toward the small ridge that overlooked Juniper Falls. Moonlight silvered the snow, revealing a vast hush of pine forest and starlit sky. Neither spoke for a moment, caught up in the tranquil beauty. At last, Rowan cleared his throat. "Faye, I've been wanting to show you something." She peered at him curiously as he handed over a small cloth bundle from his coat pocket. Inside lay a polished piece of metal, shaped into a stylized lily flower with engraved petals. "I've been working on it," he said, voice a bit shy, "as an emblem of, well, new chapters, I guess." Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. The metal lily was a perfect representation of rebirth through flame, hammered into new form by Rowan's skilled hands. She recognized it as a token of affection, far more intimate than a casual gift. "It's beautiful," she whispered, brushing her finger over the cool metal petals. "I can't imagine the time and care that went into shaping this." He shrugged, slightly self-conscious. "Time is something I have, and shaping battered metal into something worthwhile, that's my craft." There was a deeper meaning behind his words, echoing both their stories. She carefully folded the cloth over the piece, heart full. "I'll cherish it." They continued walking under the moonlight, drifting near the forge. Rowan paused at its darkened door. "I have so many reasons to stay in Juniper Falls," he admitted softly. "Your arrival is one more." She remembered the day she first arrived, carrying heartbreak and only a trunk to her name. She recalled how he'd offered to help, unflinching at her scars. She reached out now, cupping his cheek, scarred skin against scarred skin. He didn't flinch, leaning into her touch. "Rowan," she began, pulse thrumming in her throat. She wanted to express all she felt. Gratitude, admiration, the warmth that swelled inside her each time their eyes met. Perhaps it was too soon. Perhaps not. The words simply came. You, you make me believe in possibilities again." He let out a breath, a relieved half laugh. "You do the same for me, Faye." I'd nearly forgotten how it felt to let someone close. He gently pulled her into a soft, lingering kiss, tender in its discovery of shared courage. When their lips parted, the hush of night pressed in, holding them in a cocoon of acceptance. Time slipped away as they stood there, leaning against the closed forge door. The old scars on their faces, once symbols of shame and rejection, now felt like badges of resilience, entwining their histories. No longer defined by pain or pity, they found in each other a kindred spirit, forging a love that recognized all their chapters, both the fire and the flower that sprang from its ash. Days later, the council reached a balanced compromise on the railroad route, preserving Rowan's smithy and ensuring no forced relocations. Everett Harper was forced to accept partial defeat, his local influence overshadowed by the rising voice of a community that recognized its own values. Faye continued teaching, watching her students thrive. The hammered metal lily piece became her prized possession, a daily reminder of redemption, of forging new paths from old wounds. And one afternoon after the final bell, Rowan Fairburn arrived at the schoolhouse, dressed neatly, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. In front of a few wide-eyed children, he knelt on one knee and quietly asked if Faye Morrison would consent to marry him. Her stunned yes echoed through the empty classroom like a joyful refrain, sealing a story that began in heartbreak and ended in hope. The townsfolk would talk for years of how the scarred blacksmith and the scarred teacher came to Juniper Falls by separate roads, found each other in shared resilience, and built a life that shone brighter than any old scars could dim. Reflecting on Faye's triumph, we see how adversity can sharpen our determination instead of defeating it. Every stare at her scars once felt like a knife, yet teaching the town's children revealed her unmatched compassion and tenacity. Rowan, too, found that the forge did more than shape metal. It pieced together two wounded hearts. Their scars, once emblematic of broken dreams, became proud testaments to a life reborn through kindness, perseverance, and mutual support. In this mountain town, unity and understanding overthrew doubt and judgment. Faye discovered a purpose deeper than any rejection could diminish, and Rowan discovered hope strong enough to mend years of self-imposed isolation. Now it's your turn to weigh in. What moment resonated with you most? Drop a comment below and let's discuss how courage and kindness kindle connections we never thought possible. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe to keep the Frontiers lessons alive and bright in every new story we share.